Well, here we are again, Brother Peter, with tidbits from the Word. You know, Jesus, as he walked across this earth, he came to heal. He healed many physically, but he came to heal the heart and the soul of man. And when God said, when he spoke out of heaven and said, "This is my beloved Son, hear him," it was the soul of God speaking. The flesh of God was Jesus Christ walking on this earth. The Spirit of God was given to Jesus also to walk on this earth with. And God said through his soul, "This is my beloved Son, hear him." And so we're going to look right now in the book of Luke in chapter 7. If you've got a Bible, you need to turn there and look in Luke chapter 7. We're going to look at the healing of a man whose life had left him, of a young boy. His life had left him. Now, the compassion that brought Jesus to the scene in the first place is it was a funeral, a carrying away of this young man who had lost, the life had gone out of his body. And Jesus had the ability to put the life back in his body, to raise the dead. And so let's look in 13. And by the way, just a little while ago, we did a 15-minute excerpt on zeal. It was the zeal of the Lord that prompted him to do this. Now, it said, when the Lord saw her, this was a woman, and we can go up to let's go up to 11 and start. It came to pass the day after, that after the healing of the centurion's servant. Remember, the centurion came to him and said, "My servant is sick." And Jesus said, "Well, I'll go to him." The centurion said, "He's too sick. You haven't got time to walk that far where he is. And then he went into the city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people. And now when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out. No, this is a different one. Now I've got to go back to the centurion. When the centurion came to him, Jesus said, through your faith, the man said, "All you have to do, Jesus, speak the words and he'll be well." And the centurion headed back to his house, and they were running. Some of the people were running toward him, part way to his house, and hollering at him, "Hey, your servant's good. He's healed. He's living." And the guy inquired of them what hour it was. He said, "What hour was that he got up and got good?" And they told him, and he said, "That's the hour Jesus spoke those words." So Jesus didn't have to be there present in the body to do what he did. He was the Son of God, with the power of God, with the knowledge of God, with the ability of God to know all things. It might baffle your mind if you would go back and study that God knows the age of every lamb that was sacrificed. God put an age on it. He said it must be of a certain age, and it must be of this. It must have not one blemish. God knew if it had a blemish. They had to look a lamb over good. If that lamb had, a white lamb had one speck of black, one black hair in it, it couldn't be sacrificed. It had to be pure and clean, and had to be perfect. And God knew that. And God accepted that. And that's what God accepted. He said that he went into the city called Nain, where his disciples went with him, and much people. And now when he came nigh unto the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was there with her. Now let me tell you a little story right quick like. A little story was that this widow had this one son left. He was not a young boy, he was an older person, and he was laying on this wooden thing that four men carried on their shoulder. And they were Jews. And Jews were not allowed to touch a dead body or a dead thing. And so he's laid up there and they're walking. Now Jesus comes along in verse 13. And when the Lord saw he had compassion on her. He didn't have compassion on the dead man. He had compassion on the widow. Why did he have compassion on the widow? If you study the Bible, when this son died, this widow became an outcast. If she had no other living relative to take her in, she had no living person to take care of her. Jesus knew her, and he knew her life. Evidently she was his child. And said unto her, Weep not. And he came and touched the barrier. For a Jew to touch that barrier, other than the 4 men that were commissioned to carry it, was a thing worthy of death. Now listen to this. This refers to the wooden frame. That wooden frame, the barrier, was the wooden frame that they were carrying, and that they had this man laid up on the top. And it was against the shoulders of those 4 men. And the Mosaic law said you couldn't touch anything pertaining to death. However, this didn't apply to Jesus. For his touching and his defeating death. He touched it and defeated death. Death itself, which he would do on the cross of Calvary. This is a foreshowing of one raised from the dead. You say, why is this story in the Bible, Brother Peter? This story's in the Bible for a reason. This boy, this man, however old he was, died for a reason. Everything Jesus had that he was coming against in his life, his whole life, was foreknown by God. Everything that Jesus did spoke to the crowd, spoke to the people, and is speaking to us today. That he's showing the foreshadowing of a man going to death and raising again. Listen to this. He's showing the cross of Calvary. It said, and they who bore him stood still in his presence. You know, when you get in the presence of Jesus, everything can stand still, including death. Death cannot pass by Jesus. If he desires to reverse it, it's reversed. Listen to what he said. He said, young man. So we see now it was a young man. I say unto you, arise. This presents the deity of Jesus Christ. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, all in one. That's the deity of Jesus Christ. And he was showing that one of these days the power of resurrection, which will be used shortly with him on the cross, was going to be brought up. In 1 Corinthians 15 and 51, if you have a Bible at hand, you need to get it out. Go to 1 Corinthians and 15 and 51 and take a look. Take a look at this. That's 12. Chapter 15, 13. It takes a second sometime to get there. 14. All right. 15. Okay. Now I got to get to 51. That's a couple pages in this little Bible to get to 51. Now, man, there's 4 pages in this little Bible. I got a little Bible in my hand, and it's 4 pages. Let's look at verse 51. 51 says, Behold, I saw you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet sound, and the dead shall rise incorruptible. Hey, I don't know how long that young man had been dead, and you don't either. But it don't take long for a body stinketh. When he raised Lazarus from the dead, they said he'd been 3 days dead. His body stinks by now. In 3 days, it was stinking. And in that climate over there, I'm surprised 3 days. It wouldn't take 3 days. Well, here's this a dead man laying on this, young man laying on this thing, and Jesus walks up and speaks. Listen to this. He began to speak. Man, can you imagine what a scene this must have been? Woo-wee! Can you imagine? And he delivered him to his mother. Man, she could dry her tears now. She had been weeping before with a broken heart. And this represents a great meeting that will be someday take place in heaven. Jesus doing this and giving her this great meeting again with this son that was dead. It represents the fact that with Jesus, raised him from the cross, died, raised again, walked with the Father, and one day we're going to walk in face to face with him and meet him. And he was dead, sat up, and began to speak. And he delivered him to his mother. Hey, what a scene. Can you imagine them guys that bury on their four shoulders? Can you imagine how quick they dropped that thing down to the ground and said, you know something? There's a possibility they ran. It doesn't say. There's a possibility they were frightened. There's a possibility that they just ran away. All right. She could now dry her tears. Hey, she could dry her tears now. And there came a fear on all, and they glorified God. See, those guys carrying him were frightened, saying that a great prophet is risen up among us. Jesus had been among them all this time, but they hadn't recognized him. But now they did. Such power that Jesus showed in the physical, what was to everybody that was there, was incomprehensible. They couldn't comprehend it. Neither would you or I. If we were at I heard a preacher preaching a day or two ago, and he said, there's two things I'd like some people to say at my funeral, at my when they're looking at me in the casket. And the man said, what would that be? Well, and he said, one of them would say, well, man, he looks almost alive, doesn't he? And the second man would say, I think I saw him move. So that would he'd like them to say. And they glorified God. Everything that Jesus did brought glory to the Father. Nothing Jesus did brought glory to himself. Everything he did was to bring glory to his Father. Saying that a great prophet is risen up among us, the people said. And they were correct. They were correct. He had been brought up. And he was God in the flesh. That was his deity, that he could do that. And he was their Messiah, yet they didn't know that. But they couldn't quite understand that. They could not understand that he was the Messiah standing there, because he hadn't gone to the cross yet, and the Holy Spirit hadn't been delivered yet unto all people at any time in all places. And that God had visited his people was the proclaim that, God was going to visit his people through his Son. That was a truth. Verse 17. And this rumor of him went throughout all Judea and throughout all of the regions round about. And what was this pertaining to? It was pertaining to the debate that had been already through those that were scribes and Pharisees about this man, Jesus. And the truth was coming out now, and they were seeing it physically. And the disciples of John showed him of all these things. They told John all about Christ. And John, calling unto him 2 of his disciples, sent them to Jesus, saying, Are you he who should come, or look we for another? This John was the last prophet. We've got to go. Our time is come and gone. This is a 15-minute excerpt, and I'm over. We'll see you.